So I had a 2-year contract with the company I worked for. When that contract was completed, I made a decision to actually resign from the company and go to grad school, which I actually followed through on. But it's interesting, I had a great experience in Libya. In fact, I really enjoyed it. In fact, I was asked not long ago if because I visited a lot of places in the world with the jobs I had, where would you like to go back to? What area did you really like? And I think Libya is high on my list. I think the desert was most attractive, all the Greek and Roman ruins, the Libyan people themselves. I really liked Libya. I could go back there and live. But I'm 82, so it's unlikely that I'm going to do that. My son said, well, you liked the desert, but now at this age, you really like desert with another S, deserts. And I can identify with that. When I left Libya, I gained entrance to a graduate school in Arizona. It's now a school which has changed its name. It's now the Thunderbird School of Global Management at Arizona State University. It had a different name when I went there in 1965. So in 1965, I leave Libya. I had 2 months before I had to show up for school, so I thought, well, I'll just travel around. So I bought some airline tickets to take me down through East Africa and then over through the Middle East, through India, onto Japan, Philippines, and so on. So my first jaunt after Libya was an airplane trip down to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, which was kind of uneventful, except I met a guy at the airport in Addis Ababa, and he asked me, where are you going? And I said, well, I'm heading for Nairobi in Kenya. He said, really? Well, that's where I'm going. And we got to talking. Turns out he was in his mid to late 20s, and he was the operating officer for 7-Up for all of Africa. He had responsibilities for 7-Up's operations for all of Africa. Just a young guy. He's really sharp. He was from Belgium. But anyway, we got to talking, and he said, hey, I'm going to climb Mount Kilimanjaro when we get to Nairobi. Would you like to join us? And actually, the thought of climbing a mountain didn't appeal to me at all. I think I was probably pretty out of shape. In the desert, you hardly walked at all. You moved around in trucks. And I think I was pretty much out of shape. I was smoking 3 packs of cigarettes at that time, each day. It was crazy. And I was out of shape. So that didn't appeal at all. But he did talk about it. He said, well, hey, I'm staying at the New Stanley Hotel. Let me know if you'd like to make that trip. Well, I was staying at the New Stanley myself. But we parted company when we got to Nairobi. And I didn't see him for several days. But while I was there, I thought, I want to check out the animal life on the Serengeti plain. So I went on a tour. It was a camping tour. A German company had it. And they had beautiful tents. These tents were equipped with canvas bathtubs. Each tent had a bathtub in it. And a couple of people associated with the camping site that would fill your bathtub with warm water and everything. It was really kind of cool. But I remember we were on the Serengeti plain, and we'd seen all kinds of animals. We were driving around out there. That's the area where the great African animal migrations take place. So there was a lot to see. But I remember one afternoon, late afternoon, just before dinner, I came outside of the tent, and they had a kind of a veranda that had stone and some seats, chairs, and what have you. And had a couple of drinks, and the sky was kind of cloudy. In fact, it had been as I arrived in Nairobi. But I stood there watching, and all of a sudden the clouds opened up. And I'm looking right in the face of Mount Kilimanjaro. We were right at the base of it. I didn't realize it. I mean, we were miles from it, but it's so big. We were It was like, whoa. I looked at that mountain and I thought, I'd like to climb that. So anyway, I got all excited about, yeah, that would be worthwhile. So anyway, had a lot of fun on the Serengeti Plain. But when I got back to Nairobi, I found my friend Michelle DeCoonan and said, I'd like to join you on that trip. Well, I'll share that adventure later. But what was really interesting, the tour guide had a Volkswagen bus, microbus, and it had big windows and it had a sunroof so you could stand up in it and see all kinds of things. We saw every conceivable animal you can think of that would be typical of East Africa. But there were a couple of things I saw that really left an impression with me. The first one was we were near a small pond. There are not a lot of ponds in East Africa, so animals would frequent those locations a lot, particularly at night. Well, this was early in the morning. And there was a car out there, a foreign car, and it was stopped and there were people in it. And I thought it was kind of odd. There wasn't anything out there for them to be doing, but the cars just stopped out in the middle of nowhere near this pond. And then all of a sudden I saw it. A pride of lions had kind of parked themselves nearby that pond. And one of the female lions started walking toward that vehicle. It wasn't moving, and the people are inside, the windows are up. And the lion started sniffing around the car and ended up putting its paws not only on the top but on the hood and the trunk. And apparently there was food inside that vehicle. They had a picnic lunch or something. And I'd never seen anything like that. And I thought, I wonder if that lion will try to break the window and get in there and get that lunch. Well, the lion didn't break the window. But it was just fascinating to see that lion up close. The fact that a lion would approach a car, and so on and so forth. And the people were completely calm inside. But at that location, the second thing we saw, the guide said, pull the van over here, and then he located a spot, and he said, let's wait. If these lionesses are here in this area, let's watch them. So we pulled the van up, and we actually got out, and we're taking pictures of different things we saw. But he pointed out 3 lionesses, and he said, keep your eye on those lionesses. And also, did you notice the giraffe over there? Well, none of us had noticed the giraffe, but there was a wooded section near that pond, a lot of tall trees with a lot of foliage on them, and pretty dense undergrowth, as I remember. Anyway, the giraffe had his back to us, and he had his neck stretched as high as he could, and he's eating some of the leaves on the upper parts of these trees, just completely oblivious to anything around him. But the 3 lions were very much aware of him. And what we saw was absolutely fascinating. We watched those lions closely, and the guide was explaining what was going on. The lions were probably a mile away from that giraffe. They were crouched down, and they kept watching the giraffe, what he was doing. He was totally oblivious to us or those lions. But one of the lions left the little group of 3, and off to the left of where the giraffe was, maybe half a mile or so to the left of him, he entered that wooded portion and then moved deep into that underbrush and showed up close to where the giraffe was eating. It was clear that the giraffe saw the lion. The giraffe looked and saw the lion in the underbrush, but he didn't do anything. The giraffe didn't do anything. He just kept eating. And somebody said to the guide, why doesn't the giraffe run? Now, this is what he told us. He said, a giraffe is not afraid of a lion. In fact, no lion will probably, on their own, attack a giraffe. And what we were told was that the giraffe's hoof is extremely heavy, and if a lion started messing with him, that hoof on a long leg swung through the air would crush a lion's skull in a second. So it was obvious the giraffe saw the lion in the underbrush, but he made no effort to do anything about it. But the other two lions are busy sneaking up behind the giraffe. So it's pretty clear what was going on. The one in the underbrush was keeping the giraffe distracted. The other two are creeping up behind him. And then in a moment's notice, they sprang out of some tall grass. One of them leaped on the giraffe's back, and the other one got hold of his leg. They brought that giraffe down in a really quick time, just brought him down. And within, gosh, it seemed like seconds, the giraffe was on the ground, and they were ripping at the gut of the giraffe. They exposed all the innards of the giraffe just instantaneously. And then proceeded, they killed the giraffe. They proceeded to feast on the flesh of the giraffe. The third lion came out, and he joined company to enjoy dinner. So we sat there and watched it. It was gruesome in one sense to see how animals behave. But of course that's animal behavior. But nonetheless, it was a bloody, bloody encounter. But what was kind of interesting, the guide got out of the Volkswagen van, and he took out a knife that he carried with him, and he walked up to where the lions were feeding on the giraffe, and he yelled at them. I don't know what he yelled. He yelled something at the lions, and they were aware of him, but they backed off. And he walked up to the the giraffe carcass, and a giraffe has a long, skinny tail. Then on the end is a big glob of hair-like structures, like a pom-pom. And he cut off that tail so that there was about a 1-foot handle associated with the ball of hair on the end. He cut it off and he brought it back. The lions didn't mess with him. They were really busy eating. But he brought it back, and somebody said, "What are you going to do with that?" And he said, "Oh, this is for the chief of my tribe. This becomes a sacred fly whisk. And when it's dried, he will use it to whisk off the flies." A very sacred item, apparently, for the chief of his tribe. So anyway, that was one of the things we saw. But there were many. But the other thing we saw that I was fascinated with, we came to another spot where there was some water, standing water, and forested area behind it. And there were elephants in there. There was a little tiny elephant and some great big ones. There was a whole herd of them. They were parked back in the trees, amongst the trees. Anyway, our guide pulled that van pretty close to where they were. And one of the big elephants, that looked like a bull, began to trumpet. His ears went up. They looked like wings sticking out, and he began to trumpet. And which suggested that he was very unhappy that we were approaching him. But the guide just pulled the van up fairly close. I mean, when I say close, could have been, 300 yards, but it seemed close to me. But the trumpeting bull began moving forward and making more noise and looked agitated. And I thought, oh my goodness, this bull's going to attack us. He had 2 huge ivory tusks. He could have made a mess out of our van. But anyway, the whole tribe of elephants began to move toward us. And here again, this guide gets out of the bus, and he said something in his language. I don't know what he said, but I know how he said it. It was extremely loud. And he yelled at these elephants, and they were startled, and they backed off. It wasn't magic. It was, he knew these animals. Perhaps they were aware of vehicles. They were not startled by the presence of mankind in vehicles. But anyway, he knew what he was doing, and he caused those elephants to back off. Well, there are more stories about a rhinoceros that in the Ngorongoro crater where we were. that started to charge our vehicle, and got the same thing. The guide got out and said something, spoke in a strong voice. It was just amazing to me. I'm sure in pure wild sense that these animals would not have obeyed a man, a human. But there was so much human activity in all these areas, sightseers, tourists, that apparently there's a new relationship that develops between the animals and the tourists. Great experience to see these animals. But that view of Kilimanjaro was on my mind. Oh my goodness, was it on my mind, and I knew I wanted to climb it. So when our camping venture was over, we got back to the New Stanley Hotel, and I found my friend, and we arranged to make that climb.